So welcome everybody. And I think most of you know I'm Deborah Brunner from the Together Plan. So I'm going to be introducing the programme and then I'm going to pass over to our speakers who I will be introducing. But I just want to do a little bit of management of expectations because this is a really, really packed programme and it is quite possible we may run over time. But if you need to go before we get to the end and we haven't quite finished, it's recorded, so you will catch whatever you miss if you have to go. But I'm not going to stop the flow because it's going to be very compelling and very, very interesting. So I'm going to share my screen and try not to use up all the time with my talking. Let me just remove this out the way. Okay, so this is the talk on the resistance in the Nesvizh Ghetto. It's the third of a series of talks that we have been giving, which is part of the campaign to raise money for two memorials in Nesvizh, but I'm going to talk about that later. We have, sorry, just going back, just to say it's going to be, I'm going to hand over to Tamara Vershitskaya shortly, and we have three speakers. So we have Dr. Leonid Gershkovich, who is in Israel, and we have Dr. Bernice Goll and Jeff Goll, and they're in America. So this is a truly international event, and Tamara is in Belarus. So a little bit about the Together Plan, just to get you all landed. Our mission as a charity based in the UK is to promote community development through the lens of Jewish cultural heritage, through research, exploration, cultural events and dialogue. We work in former Soviet Union countries and we're a dedicated charity working to bettering civil society, and our current focus is in Belarus. So how do we do what we do? Well, we're building a Jewish cultural heritage route in Belarus, which is a citizen-led civil society initiative. So we're involving people on the ground in Belarus into this initiative. We're translating and publishing books that would otherwise have been lost and forgotten. We educate by bringing the story of the Soviet Jews killed in the Holocaust into focus. We are connecting Jewish people all over the world to their ancestry. We're sending humanitarian aid to the poorest in society, and we're engaging young adults in our Jewish youth heritage clubs in Belarus. We are preserving the past, we are building the future, and we're saving the history and heritage of Jewish Belarus for future communities and future generations with communities in Belarus and beyond. And the with is really important because our work is community capacity building. It's all about rebuilding and reviving communities. So over to our speakers. So Tamara is going to be introducing the topic, but I'm going to be introducing the speakers. Tamara is our heritage specialist at the Together Plan. She is the co-founder of the Jewish Resistance Museum in Belarus, and she is also involved in our archive services work in Belarus. So she's a very important member of our team. Now, over to Dr. Leonid Gershkovich. Dr. Leonid Gershkovich was born in 1981 in Gomel, Belarus, then the Soviet Union. Repatriated to Israel as an infant, where he grew up and was educated. After completing high school, he attended a pre-military leadership academy and served in a combat unit of the Israeli Defense Forces between 2001 and 2004, later continuing in the reserves and working as a Jewish agency emissary in Russia and the UK. A graduate of the Hebrew University's Revivim program, he earned a BA in Judaic Studies and the Hebrew Bible 2010 and an MA in Jewish History and Contemporary Jewry 2011 before completing his PhD at Tel Aviv University in 2022 on Jews and Jewish life in southeastern Belarus 1917 to 1941. His academic and professional career spans research and education, including work with the Goldstein Goring Diaspora Research Center over a decade teaching Jewish Bible and history, and most recently serving as a school principal between 2024 to 2025. An independent researcher, Dr. Gershkovich focuses on pre-Soviet and Soviet Jewry, the Holocaust in the USSR, Soviet Jewish activism, Zionism, post-Soviet Jewish identity, and modern anti-Semitism. His recent study through ACTA, Siska Hebrew University, examined anti-Semitic propaganda in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus during the Russo-Ukrainian War, and his ongoing research explores how Soviet-era tropes reappear in contemporary discourse on Zionism and Israel. Through his work, he continues to illuminate the histories of Eastern European Jewry and their enduring impact on Jewish identity and memory today. Now, I'm going to also introduce Dr. Bernice Goll and Jeff Goll, who will be following the talk by Leonid Gershkovich. So basically, Leon, who I'm going to call Dr. Gershkovich Leon from now on, is giving us the history of the resistance in the uprising in the Nesvizh Ghetto. And then Bernice and Jeff are going to be telling us a personal story. So Dr. Bernice Goll is the second of three children, with Linda Steinberg, the eldest, and Jeff Goll, the youngest, born to Holocaust survivor Abe Goll and his wife Barbara. From an early age, they remember hearing the stories of horror and sadness experienced by their father and his parents during World War II, including the loss of Gabriel, Abe's elder brother, in Poland, Belarus, and Austria. But they also learned of their grandparents Sol and Toby Goldberg's courage, hope, and resourcefulness in surviving the Nazi onslaught and Soviet aftermath. Despite these experiences after the war, Sol, Toby, and Abe did not harbor hate or resentment. They only wanted to live, love, and move into the future while treasuring the memories of their lost family, friends, and home. Bernice and her brother Jeff have retraced their family's journey from Kalisz, Poland to New Jersey, USA. They documented it with family interviews, genealogical records, and published first-hand accounts. Bernice and Jeff feel it is an honor to be able to tell this story, not just because it is about their family, but because it represents both the worst and the best of our human story. Dr. Bernice Goll has practiced optometry in Pennsylvania for the past 35 years. When she's not working, she loves spending time with her family, walking in nature with her dog Bo, photography, and learning to play the mandolin. And Jeff Goll is a water resource and geotechnical engineer. He is co-founder and co-owner of Princeton Hydro, an international civil engineering firm based in the USA. Jeff has been recognized for his and Princeton Hydro's work and leadership in environmental improvement and restoration. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing. Well, no, I'm going to stay sharing actually. And I'm going to hand over to Tamara, because she's actually got a couple of slides that she's given to me that I'll be sharing with you. So without further ado, Tamara.
Thank you, Deborah. We continue. We continue from our previous meeting when we spoke, when we listened to beautiful stories about the Jews of Nesvizh, to the last page in the history of the Jewish community of Nesvizh. So in 1939, before the war, the Jewish community numbered 5,000 people. In 1941, they were 4,000, sorry. In 1941, they were 5,000, because 1,000 refugees from Poland arrived in Nesvizh. By the end of 1941, only 600 remained. Christian Gerlach, a scholar from Germany, he wrote a book called Calkulierte Morde. His book is based on German documents from German archives. He gives this number, 600. The testimonies give the number 585 Jews survived the first massacre in October 30, 1941. From these 585 people, only 185 were native, local Jews from Nesvizh. 400 were refugees from Poland. Why so? Why so few native Jews survived and 2 times more refugees from Poland, strangers in this city? Did Polish Jews know better how to survive? Were they more resourceful than native Jews? I hope that Leon's presentation will answer these questions or will give us a clue. Anyway, the fact that Magaliv, a lawyer from Warsaw, became the chairman of the Judenrat in Nesvizh, that Shlomo Milstein, also a refugee from Poland who ran textile workshops before Nesvizh was occupied. He became Jewish commandant of the ghetto. Most of the police, Jewish police in the ghetto, were refugees from Poland. Joseph or Józef Marchwiński, a Polish communist who escaped from Lodz with his wife, arrived in Nesvizh. He followed his Jewish wife to the ghetto, and when she was killed in the first massacre, and later he lost his son, his baby son, he escaped from the ghetto a couple of weeks before the revolt. He became a leader of a group of Jews in the forest. He absorbed a group of refugees who survived the revolt, the liquidation of the ghetto in Nesvizh, and he brought these Jews to the Belsky partisans. So refugees, Polish refugees in Nesvizh, played a very important role in the story, which we are going to hear to speak about today. And Józef Marchwiński, by the way, he received the title of the Righteous Among Nations in 1968. So I'm really happy that Bernice and Jeff are with us today, because their grandfather rescued his own family by constructing a hiding place before the revolt. So that's how he managed to rescue his family. They were refugees from Poznan. And we have now a rare opportunity to listen to practically first-hand account, because Bernice audio taped her grandfather's story. And Jeff, he video recorded his father's story, who was a teenager at that time, during a talk to the community, to the Jewish community. It all happened on a very small territory. Deborah, I would may I ask you to show that slide of the map from the Yitzhak book of Nesvizh, so that we can relate the story to the place. We saw this map during the previous presentations. And I thank Ken Domeshik for help with establishing the boundaries of the ghetto. In fact, I found in Sholem Cholowski's writings and in David Farfel's testimony the description of the boundaries to the ghetto. So it was small. It was really small, 150 to 250 meters. That's all. Sholem Cholowski wrote, "We were surrounded by a fence from the corner of Syrokomle Street." This is the vertical red line, opposite the Green Square, to the corner of St. Michal's Street, a red line at the bottom. David Farfel wrote, "The fence ran along the right side of Michalishok Street, St. Michal's Street, to Chesik's house in the middle of the street, and from there to the vegetable gardens up to the bridge opposite the power station." The gardens are marked green on this map. And then further on via Spitalna Street and Syrokomle Street. That's how the shape of a square became resembling letter Yud, if we extract the gardens. And the gardens were used, vegetable gardens, by several families who grew onions, cucumbers, lettuce, and radish there during the ghetto time. And David Farfel, he writes about the main gates to the ghetto. The entry gate, the large entry gate, was opposite the synagogue, meaning the Kalti Shul, the big synagogue, and a small door for people was next to the main gate. There was a booth placed near the door where a Jewish policeman sat, and his role was to control, to check everybody coming in and out. In fact, nobody was allowed to come in. Strangers were not allowed, and Jews were not allowed to go out on their wish. Women worked outside the ghetto. So women were allowed to go out because there was a workshop established for women next, very close to the Orthodox Church. And they did laundry there, they sewed there, and the workshops were managed by a Belarusian. And we know the names of two women who are especially important for this story, Leah Duker and Rachel Kagan, who worked as cleaners in the Außenkommandatur. Deborah, please show the next slide where David Farfel, it's from his book, from the book with his testimony, where he marked the same territory of the ghetto. Can you send me this map? And he also wrote a legend so that we know what is where. And the next slide is the building of that same Außenkommandatur. Nothing has been left on the territory of the ghetto today because everything was destroyed during the revolt and later pulled down. The remains of the houses were pulled down. But this building of the Kommandatur survived. And it stands on the opposite side of the former Sirakomle Street, which is today Karl Liebknecht. It's named after Karl Liebknecht. And this building was where Leah and Rahel worked as cleaners. From this building, they smuggled ammunition and guns, and submachine gun was smuggled from this building into the ghetto through the main gate. So the story we are going to hear now from Leon Gershovich happened here. Leon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Thank you very much, Deborah. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, very well. So I'll share my presentation with you. Okay. So I hope you see it well now.
Yes.
And we will talk a little bit, actually not so a little bit, but we will talk about the resistance in Ghetto Nesvizh. I hope you'll find it interesting, and maybe I'll give you some new information, maybe some new perspective about the subject most of you already know pretty well or heard about it. Okay. Okay. I would like to start with a personal letter of Shalom Mordechai Chishen of Nesvizh to a relative in Tel Aviv, dated 18th of July 1942. This letter exists in Yad Vashem archives and also Yad Vashem website. Everybody can see it, everybody can read it, and it puts a very unique spot on a tragedy of the Jews of Nesvizh from personal perspective. Here is its English translation. I would like to read it with you. My dear, I am writing this letter and I don't know to whom it will reach. I am leaving it to a Gentile with the address of our friends. We are in the ghetto with the yellow patches on us, on our suffering. There are no words to describe them, and there is no time for that either. Death stares us in the face. We are going to die knowing that the enemy of the world will lose the war and that someone will take revenge. Until now, few of us are still kept alive, so we can cover the graves a little in a horrible way, so that there are people who are still alive and struggling in the face of terrible torture. Not unlike the torture we read about in Spain and other inquisitions, they cannot be compared to our present suffering. Is there anything more terrible than burning a man at the stake, as was done in Spain, through hundreds of children in front of their mothers into a pit and burying them alive, and their mothers are forced to see all this? To this day, I am in Nesvizh with my whole family. Chaim Erke is with his family, including his father, in Baranovici. His mother, may she rest in peace, has lost her mind and drowned herself in a water cistern. We have become so hardened that we can't shed tears. We are awaiting to die in order to be saved from further humiliation and shame. We are in Nesvizh, and we hear now, day by day, those who are in the town are being killed, and now it is our turn, today or tomorrow. We lie in our clothes with the children, so beloved and talented, and await this. My Herschel is a wonderful guy, taller than me, honest, smart, and talented. Yuditka is a wonderful girl, half a head taller than her mother. Oh, how wonderful she is. And last but not least, Shloimele, a wonderful, cute, and sweet boy. Oh, woe, woe to us. I promised the Christian that will send this letter to you to reward him after the war. Shalom Mordechai Chishen, July 18, 1942. It is sent the letter, it's unclear who exactly sent the letter to Hannah Chernichov in Tel Aviv. And probably this letter, which is a very personal letter, puts a spot on all the tragedy of the Jews in Nesvizh and generally of the Jews in occupied Soviet territories and generally in occupied Europe and other places where Nazis reached during the Second World War. So I'll skip the historical background because probably you have talked about this quite a lot, but we all know that Nesvizh before the World War, before the outbreak of Second World War, was a vibrant Jewish community, like other Jewish communities in Poland, in interwar Poland, between the First and the Second World War, with all the unique human and political diversity that was part of the life of Jews in Poland during the time between the two world wars. So the war for Nesvizh actually starts in September 1939. As we all know, September the 1st, 1939, the Nazi Germany invades Poland, and following Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement, Soviet Union invades all Poland from the east on September the 17th, 1939. So at the outbreak of World War II, about 3,400 Jews lived in Nesvizh, nearly half of its population. As I said, in September 1939, with the Soviet invasion of eastern Poland, in accordance with the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, the Soviets occupied Nesvizh, or as they of course said, liberated Nesvizh and reunited it with Soviet Belarusia, and the town was annexed to the Belarusian Soviet Socialistic Republic, as was part of the Soviet Union. Jewish refugees from occupied Poland, more western side of Poland, the General Government, and also parts that was joined to the Third Reich, fled to Nesvizh, as well as other places in Soviet-occupied Poland, or as we can also say in Belarus. The Soviet nationalized the town's economy, dismantled Jewish institutions and organizations. It put an end to Jewish political life, and thus also pushed the Jews, to organize to underground. I claim personally in an article that I have published, that was published in East European Holocaust Research journal, that this was part of the reasons why the Jews in this part of Belarus, mainly in this part of Belarus and also northwest Ukraine, made the revolts during 1942 and 1943. I claim that the fact that the Jews were already had to go underground under the Soviet rule, it actually helped them to organize, or at least was one of the factors that helped them to organize when it was time to organize for revolt against and resistance against the Nazis. Jewish schools were merged under the Soviet Union, and the merged schools introduced Yiddish as the language of studies, as well as the Soviet curriculum. In the second year of Soviet rule, Yiddish was replaced by Russian as the language of studies in the school. With the invasion of the USSR by Nazi Germany on Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941, individual Jews from Nesvizh fled to the USSR, to the Soviet rear with the retreating Soviet army. On the eve of Nazi occupation, there were about 4,600 Jews in the town. On June 27, the Germans occupied Nesvizh, and a few days later imposed edicts on the town's Jews. Among the first edicts were the obligation to wear the yellow badge, the prohibition on walking on sidewalks, the prohibition on contact with non-Jews, and forced labor. The Germans appointed a Judenrat on 29th of July 1941 and placed a Jewish lawyer from Warsaw named Magalif, who was among the refugees in Nesvizh and spoke good German, as its head. The Judenrat organized forced labor by every Jew over 15 years old and coordinated the collection of goods and money as contributions to Germans. On September 1st, 1941, the Jews were forced to move from the main streets to crowded houses of the side streets. In October 1941, the Germans imposed a ransom on the town's Jews in Russian rubles and gold, and to secure the payment, they held Jewish men hostage. Abuses, property theft, and murders of Jews became a daily routine. The Jews' silver and copper utensils were confiscated. Residents of the town's main streets were evacuated from their homes, and any violation of German regulations were punishable by this. For example, several Jews were accused of buying potatoes from farmers and were murdered. On October 29, 1941, the Judenrat was ordered to gather all Jews in the market square. Shalom Kolavsky, well-known researcher, wrote in his memoirs, "The heart is anxious. Jews have many ideas in their mind. Maybe the Germans only intended to rob the houses, and when the job is over, they will release us. Maybe they will take hostages again to receive a ransom, and maybe, who knows, maybe they intend the same terrible thing that they did in Western Poland." The next day, 30th of October 1941, after hours of waiting in the square, 685 professionals and their families were separated from the other Jews. A selection was conducted of skilled workers based on a list. Doctors, engineers, glaziers, blacksmiths, textile workers, shoemakers, tailors, and carpenters were among those sent on one side with their families. The rest, about 4,000 men, women, and children, were taken to pits prepared in advance in the garden of the palace of Nesvizh, the palace of the Radziwill nobles, and to pits dug about 3 kilometers from the town on the way to Snow. The Jews were forced to undress, shot to death, and buried in the pits. The murderers were members of a Lithuanian murder unit, German gendarmes, and members of Eisen's Commando 8. After about 4,000 Jews of the town were murdered on October 1941, the 685 workers and their surviving families were transferred to Gymnasium building where they stayed all night. The next day, they were transferred to Synagogue Street in the town, a street that was fenced off with barbed wire and turned into a ghetto. The ghetto was located in an area of 250 meters long and 150 meters wide, where they lived in very overcrowded conditions. Forced labor continued. Groups were sent to remove any valuables from the houses of the murdered Jews, which were transferred to the local commandant's office. Some of these items were sent on to Germany. They lived crowded together in old houses and were employed in hard labor outside the ghetto or in workshops in the ghetto. The Judenrat tried to organize housing and work in the ghetto and ensure an orderly distribution of food. The ghetto also operated Jewish police without holding firearms. In December 1941, young people in the ghetto, led by the members of Hashomer HaTzair, this is a Zionist youth organization, Zionist youth movement, secretly gathered and organized themselves into a fighting underground with several members of Judenrat. They began working on weakening the head of the Judenrat, whom they didn't trust. They established a secret school in the ghetto despite an explicit German prohibition. They produced cold weapons, including knives, axes, and spike clubs, as well as incendiary materials to set houses on fire in the event of rebellion. Two engineers produced phosphoric acid to fill Molotov cocktails. Two young women who worked in the German headquarters weapons deployed smuggled bullets, hand grenades, and even a light machine gun disassembled into parts into the ghetto. Dovel Perovich smuggled pistols into the ghetto. Members of the undergrounds called on the Jews of the ghetto to dig bunkers and stock up on food. On Friday, July 17, 1942, the Jews of Nesvizh Ghetto learned of the liquidation of the Jews of town Horodzei, 14 kilometers from Nesvizh. Magaliv, the head of the Judenrat, called for a gathering of Jewish congregation. Kaddish was said for the victims. Young people argued for fleeing the ghetto. Others argued that even the young should stay with their families and not leave them to die alone. Magaliv announced that only when it was clear that the ghetto was going to be liquidated, the uprising will take place. It was decided to set the Jewish houses on fire to provide cover for those able to run into nearby forests. Non-fighting groups were organized, each consisting of 5 Jews. On Monday, July 20, 1942, Germans and Belarusians arrived in Nesvizh Ghetto and took items for craftsmen that had been given to them for repair. Following this science, the underground declared an alert. The German commander told the Judenrat that Belarusian policemen would replace the Jewish guards at the gate. Belarusian police from the surrounding areas cordoned off the ghetto at dusk. Many Jews went into their secret hiding places, called malinas as you know. During the night, the police fired scattered shots into the houses. On July 21st, Germans and local police surrounded the ghetto, and the Jews were called together for selection. But the head of Judenrat replied to the Germans that the Jews were refusing to carry out the order. The Jews of the ghetto revolted under the leadership of underground members, including Shalom Cholavsky and Chaim Eliyahu Polchek. In response, the Germans opened fire on the ghetto. From the testimony of David Farfel from Yad Vashem archives, we ran, my wife and I, into a public square. There was a feeling of extermination. They saw that the moment was approaching. The decision was made the day before. My soul will die with the Philistines. Had to be carried out. Set the ghetto on fire, create chaos. Whoever was lucky enough will survive. Alone nothing, no selection, no loot for the Germans. And so it happened. In several places in the ghetto, red flames appeared and began to engulf house after house. In the area where I was, I set fire to the houses. We saw how the ghetto was burning. And through this burning ghetto, people tried to break through the barbed wire fence. The group of Jews who were in the cold synagogue, the Kalter Shul, opened fire on Germans who were standing outside the ghetto. A battle began. End of quote. The Germans opened fire and were surprised by a shooting from the machine gun stationed on the second floor of the main Kalter synagogue. Jews attacked German soldiers as well as Belarusian auxiliary policemen, killing and wounding a few. Jews also set piles of high alight. The fire soon spread to the houses. The few ammunitions the underground members had were quickly exhausted, and the underground members continued to fight with cold weaponry and set houses in the ghetto on fire. In the battles that ensued, most of the Jews were killed. About 40 Germans and Lithuanians were wounded and killed. The ghetto residents set fire to the houses, and the fire spread to the houses in the town outside the ghetto. A few Jews survived in hiding in the ghetto. About 25 Jewish fighters managed to escape to the forest and join the partisan unit of Soviet Jews, which is part of Soviet division. Some of them reached nearby Jewish towns and announced the mass murder and the uprising. The announcement played a role in the decision of the Jews of Mir, for example, to flee the ghetto. The Red Army arrived in Nesvizh in July 1944. A few Jews survived in the forest and in hiding places with farmers. Most of the Jewish survivors who returned to Nesvizh left it after a short time. Most of them subsequently repatriated to Israel. Some of them remained and lived in the place where they grown up. Now, after the liberation of Nesvizh, of course, the Jews tried to memorize the victims. And in the beginning, the Soviet memory policy wasn't so strict, so they couldn't build a different kind of memorials, as we can see here on the slide, where Itzhak Aberovich at the mass grave of Nesvizh martyrs on the road to snow, where 2,500 victims were buried. So he set up the wooden matzeva, as well as fence around the mass grave. But of course, later on, this was removed by Soviet authorities, who created a policy which basically didn't allow memorialization with specifically Jewish science, replacing it instead with such mottos as peaceful Soviet citizens and so on. Here we can see some monuments that memorializing the murder of the Jews of Nesvizh that remain till today. And if you go there, you can all see it. We can also read very valuable information. We can find very valuable information in the Nesvizh Score book, which can be found online. And I highly recommend you, if you're able to read Hebrew and Yiddish, to read what's written there. I also highly recommend you to watch an extract from the movie Until the Last Step, which was made by an Israeli movie maker, Boris Mafzil, which also talks about the Jews of Nesvizh, the ghetto of Nesvizh, and the uprising in Nesvizh. It includes very valuable information. I'll put it later on via the chat, so you can open it afterwards if you would like to. And basically, this is the historical part of the talk. It went a bit, maybe a bit quicker than I wanted it to be, actually. But on the other hand, we are people that have a personal recollections or recollections related to their family, which is, in my opinion, are much more important and much valuable than just clear and regular historical information. So we will be able to hear them more and in deep. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. It was absolutely fascinating, really incredible. I think we'll keep all the questions for the end and we'll keep the flow going. So I'm going to hand over now to Bernice and Jeff, who will now share their personal story of what happened to their family. And then we'll all come together and you can ask all your questions from our speakers.
Okay, I'm just going to share our screen. And,
The right one.
yeah, that's right. That's the right one. All right. Can everybody see that?
Absolutely.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. We really appreciate this honor and opportunity to present our family's experience in Nesvizh during the war. We also appreciate the larger context that was provided. Just as a little background for our talk, we'll kind of intermix some of that just to give a little context to that, but we won't try to keep up too much time in, on the historical element, so to speak, but it'll definitely help give us some context. So to get started, this is about the Goldberg family. They were refugees in Nesvizh in World War II. There was a couple of years for that that occurred during that time. But a little context, because they weren't from the town, we wanted to sort of give a little background of people that were not from the town, but it gives a sense of where they came from. There we go. Okay, so this is a family photograph. This was in the town of Kalisz, where both our grandparents were from originally. Kalisz was a town in western Poland, just southeast of Poznan. And it was our family and Jews in that town go back back to the early, I think around the 1200s, sometime in that area. So it's hard to read the names on here, but we were able to identify different members of our family from that time. In the circle, you'll notice that Shia on the left, Shia Goldberg, that's Toby in the middle, and our uncle Gabriel is just there on the right. He was only looked like maybe 3 or 4 years old at the time, probably not even. It might even be a little younger than that. But you can see very typical Jewish family at that time. When after our grandparents got married and had their first child, they wanted to move to Poznan, and because he felt there's probably more opportunity there. They were also very secular in their practices. And so I think they wanted to get to a much more metropolitan area, and I think that's where at least our grandfather believed that he could make the most for his family in that time. So life in Poznan, they actually lived a really comfortable life. I think they had people that worked in the house with them, servants that would come and paid servants that would come and help them out. So they lived pretty well. Our grandfather, it says M is Moshe, but everybody called him Shia, so that's what we're going to call him from now on. But he was a furrier, and he owned a women and men's clothing store and we actually have the address and the location from finding it. Bernice actually had found it. On the left is a postcard that was sent by our grandmother Toby to her family, and it shows it was dated May 13th, 1928. It was shortly after they moved there. And just talking about her parents and siblings, telling her parents and siblings that she's sorry that she hasn't written a lot lately. Instead, she's going to send this picture, but she wasn't feeling well for a while, and so she was pretty sick. But now things are already better. But just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of their life, they lived pretty well. Just as a side note, because they lived in a large Christian area and they were pretty much within the community. They would go for walks. They would see the Polish army parade in the square. My dad remembers seeing that. He said he enjoyed doing that. And every once in a while, they'd go to a non-kosher butcher and maybe slip a little bit of a ham here and there, just to because it was something that they normally would never be able to eat. But my grandfather was a man of science, so he was very much so that way. Um, but as time went on and we started approaching 1939, obviously they heard all the news in Germany about the Nazis' rise to power, and it was something that was always on their minds, something they always talked about. There was growing fear of Nazi invasion, and they heard of the annexation of Czechoslovakia earlier in the year. And even though the Nazi Soviets, the Nazis and Soviets had signed a pact in 1939, and it was a secret, people kind of understood what was going to happen. As a matter of fact, it was pretty obvious when the Germans were starting to mass at the border of Poland, the border at the time. And German acquaintances advised them to leave the city that morning. Interestingly enough, I forgot to mention on the postcard, that was written in German. So it was sort of as I understand, a Prussian part of the old Prussian Empire. And so German was one of the primary languages there, in addition to Polish and Yiddish. So they knew a number of different languages there. So Chia, Toby, Gabriel, and Abe immediately left for Warsaw. So it was basically better to be on the Soviet side than stay where they were, they felt. So the first thing that they did is they went to Warsaw. So they went east and went to Warsaw, and they got in contact with the Paoli Zion Jewish Marxist organization, which worked to support Jewish workers and facilitate emigration to what was called then Mandatory Palestine. Basically, they were the goal, their overall arching goal was to get to Israel. They obtained information about going to Vilnius to gain permission and visas to go to Palestine. They made it as far as they boarded a train heading west, and they went to the end of the line, which was still west of it's pronounced Bug River. And so they traveled on foot on the backs of farmers' wagons, and they had to pay for that service. They crossed the Bug River, also paying local boat operators. I recall that my father talked about how I think people fell in the water, and it was very difficult to get across. People would take your money and then not help you at all. So it was a problem. And once they crossed the river, they actually got separated. This is the first of time that they got separated, with Shia and Gabriel getting separated from Toby and Abe. We're not actually sure how long they were separated, but they were soon reunited due to the communication among the refugees. So then the idea was to get up to, they traveled on foot to the Lithuanian border, but the road was closed in June of 1940 due to Russian occupation. They ended up getting arrested, like other refugees, and sent back down into Belarus, which is now where they ended up in the city of Nesvizh. So we're not going to go over the history again, but this is something we added. It was just a little background from some of our other talks, but this kind of gives you an understanding of the population and how the population had swelled once the refugees came into the town. In June 22nd, 1941, the Nazis break the pact. They invade the Soviet Union. The Russians were retreating. There's a lot of stories on documentation in Nesvizh of the Russians leaving and not allowing the Jews to stay in town. And then the Nazis enter the town. And on June 30th, the Nazis set up the Judenrat. And this is some of the information we got from the Uprising book by Shalom Chwalski. So this is, as Leon had mentioned, the Jews were ordered to move from the main streets to the alleys. They couldn't live in front. The Germans made the Jews go to the lesser housing. On October 18th, mass assemblies begin, demands for money. And then on October 30th, this is where the entire population of Jews were ordered to assemble in the town. 585 professionals were separated and taken to the local school, the school and gymnasium. The remaining 4,000, as you heard, were marched just outside of town and executed as well. So, and they, because our grandfather Shia he was an artisan and he understood how to make things. They allowed him and his family to stay. So when everybody moved to the ghettos, they were put to work. But this time, the remaining Jews committed not to go quietly. when they came back to liquidate the ghetto and do another mass execution. The Jews were forced to work and were escorted by the Christian residents as commanded by the Germans. If one was caught sneaking food back, they were severely punished and likely shot. Shia knew how to make molasses, so it was one of his talents. He had a number of different jobs, but he figured out how to make molasses using potato starch, which they found in one of the storage facilities. And so that was one of his jobs. So, and this is, Bernice, you wanted to talk about this. This is a model at our, go ahead.
So I'm going to read we have some testimony written by our grandfather that we recently had translated from different references relating to the Sefer Kalish, the Yizkor book from Kalish. This picture that you're seeing here is the bunker that they designed. And our father drew this rendering about 10 years ago for a presentation that we had done, and I will get to that in a moment. But I would like to read for you from my grandfather, so you'll have his own words about how things were in the ghetto. So the conditions in the ghetto were hard. We formed fighting groups of 10 boys headed by demobilized officers. We looked for weapons. We could not buy them. We decided to manufacture bows and arrows. A metal worker named Lachovitsky, now he was living in the land of Israel at that time, that Grandpa wrote this in 1948, made me a wooden bow and iron arrows. The test proved that this was an effective weapon. We ordered a certain quantity of bows, but the matter became known to the head of the Judenrat, the lawyer Magalif, a man from Warsaw, called and forbade us this activity. But we continued to maintain the groups, and in the course of time, we also acquired weapons, 2 rifles, 4 pistols, some grenades, a machine gun that did not work. The weapons were brought to us by girls who worked in the German headquarters. This is all, repeats of things that Leon has already said. One night the ghetto was surrounded. I went out with confident steps to the guardhouse. The Belarusian policeman took me for one of the ghetto policemen and did not shoot at me. I found Magalith and the others at the guard. They said it was still not clear why the ghetto was being surrounded, and they did not wish to take responsibility for its destruction. I returned in the same way to my post and contacted our group. We decided to flee. 6 months earlier, we had dug a hiding place with a secret exit outwards. So this is the drawing that you see here. So underneath the house in the living room, they took the floor. It's very ingenious. Instead of making a door in the middle of the floor that might be easily discovered, they decided to just take the whole floor and rotate it so that the edges, the seams would be around the edge. And this way it would just look like the edge of the floor. So they made this floor to revolve, and then they excavated the space underneath. And this took about 6 months. As you can see here, Moshe Lachovitsky on Jewish Gen, they have a translation of his testimony. And he said, we built the bunker during a very long time because the dirt was limey. We needed to hide the dirt we dug out so no one would notice the fresh dirt. So, they had piles of dirt in different places. And also I would like to give a quote here from Moshe Lachovitsky, who spoke about our grandfather and their friendship. He says, my neighbor who lived in the next house, who came to us from Prussia with a family of 4 souls and survived the first Actia, said to me, Lachovitsky, we must make some sort of cave in which to hide because the Germans will eventually annihilate us. I did not think about surviving because I was dejected, broken, but because my daughter was with me, I still persevered. However, he did not leave me alone and said I must live because of my surviving child. He gave me desire and courage. And I thought that this was a really nice testimony about my grandfather's strength, our grandfather's strength. So he describes this. Nevertheless, they waited until daybreak. When the day grew light, we heard noise. The policeman ordered the Jews to gather in the synagogue. Yeah, you can change the slide if you want. We understood the betrayal of the Judenrat. I think what he's speaking of there is Mogalif was afraid.
One sec. Oh, is this before they left?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No.
All right. Mogalif was concerned that if they started shooting, that would cause the destruction of the ghetto. I think that they were still of the belief that maybe there was something they could do to prevent this. And so I think that's what he's talking about. We decided to go down into our bunker. We were 7 people in it. And so here it was dampened. That this is again from Lachovitsky, from his testimony. It was damp in the bunker because a stream flowed near it. My daughter and I, my neighbor and his wife and two sons, that's Gabriel 16 and Abe 9. Mrs. Litvakova and another teacher entered the bunker. So it was them inside there. So Miss Litvakova, after a few hours, she started to suffocate down there. And she was panicking and she was yelling to get out. And they didn't want to let her out because they were afraid they'd be discovered. But in the end, they let her out. And she did get killed. But our father, he started to suffocate also. We had a piece of iron with us and chopped out a small hole in the top of the bunker so a little air could come through. Goldberg and his wife held their 9-year-old boy, our father, at the small opening, waving a handkerchief over his face until he was better. And they stayed in the bunker for two nights and 2 days.
2 nights and 2 days, yeah.
Okay. And then he said at 3 o'clock we left through the garden. So they had built a tunnel to exit. So at night they went out one by one. This is my grandfather again. We set a meeting place in the forest. I went out with my eldest son, and after a moment we were separated from the group, and my wife and younger son disappeared. And interesting because our grandmother and our father were with Lachovitsky. And so according to Lachovitsky's testimony, our grandfather and Gabriel disappeared. So you get the two sides of the story.
You get the chaos that was ensuing at the time.
I waited until the skies lightened, but it was no longer permitted to wait. We went out to the forest. The hours of the day we spent sitting on a tree, and at night we reached the meeting place. There was no one out there from the town, but from the town came the sound of shooting. We ate berries and lay on the ground in the bare forest ground. In the morning, we met a group of Jews from the ghetto. From their mouths, we learned of the destruction of the ghetto. The Jews who had weapons shot. One Jew grabbed a rifle from a German and killed him, but he was immediately shot by another German. The Germans immediately killed Mogalif and the other members of the Judenrat. The Jewish youth showed resistance, so that would be the members of the Hashomer Hatzer. That my grandfather, he was one of those adult people that was part of that resistance, and set the houses on fire. In the confusion, 12 people managed to escape. One of the fugitives, Langman was from Warsaw, another refugee, and he had been helping to mix the chemicals to light the fires, but he had burned his hands in the process. 2 girls also came with them, and one of them killed themselves by hanging. So this is what it was like for them just after. All right, so you can go to the next slide. So my grandfather and my uncle were separate. Our family were separated. So they were with Kishin, who wrote that letter that you had spoken of earlier, who had family in Stolpchi. I don't know how to say it, Stolpchi, I want to say. They traveled together. Later, they learned that all the others were killed by Belarusians. Kishin had gold coins, but their attempts to buy bread failed. They walked towards Stolpchi, where Kishin had relatives. It was a 5-day walk. After 5 days of walking, they reached Stolpchi. They went into the house of a Sabbatnik, which my grandfather described in his story as a Sabbath-keeping Christian who gave them money and food and showed them how to get into town safely. The Judenrat in Stolpchi did not allow them to remain, but gave them shelter for a couple of days. Kishin stayed with his relatives there in the ghetto in Stolpchi. Our grandfather and Gabriel worked at the sawmill in Stolpchi for a little while, and they slept at night in the forest. But eventually they left to go to Mir.
That's where they went west, as you see in the picture.
Yeah, so you can see at the bottom of the map is Nesvizh, and they went up to Stolpchi, which is up the top right there, and then over to the left near Mir. The Mir ghetto, so they got into the Mirsky castle. They were invited in by someone who was inside there, and they were mentioned actually in this book, In the Lion's Den by Nachamatek. It's described how a man, Goldberg, and his teenage son had shown he had come from the woods and he was looking emaciated and with his beard grown, and that he was very frightened. And he brought news of what happened in Nesvizh and also what was going on in the forest. And he left with them when Oswald Rufisen, who you probably all know was he was a Jewish man who hid in the German army, and he helped many of the Jews from Mir to escape. And so Grandpa and Gabriel escaped with those people. They went into the woods, and they were making the secret whistle sound in the woods to look for partisans, and they came across Yusik Marchevinsky's group. Now it turns out that our grandmother and our father, who had been separated from our grandfather, had gone with Lachovitsky, and Lachovitsky had gotten them to Yusik's group in the forest. And so they had been with Yusik's group all this time. And so when the scout from Yusik's group found my grandfather and asked who he was, he said, "Oh, well, we have your wife and child." So they were reunited at that point. So they stayed with Yusik's group. They built a bunker near the Niemen River. We can go to the other side there. The other side, thank you. And so this map shows down the bottom left is Mir, and over to the right is Stobchi, and where the arrow is, I just wanted to point to the Niemen River. So I'm assuming that that's
Blue arrow.
the blue arrow. Yes, thank you. Was where around the place where they had the camp with Yusik, and they decided to establish a base in a small thicket. They had weapons, and they also had some food. That was thanks to Yusik's group and ingenuity.
It's been the Russian parachutists that were there as well. Yep.
Oh yeah, thank you. So yeah, the Yusik was associated with these Russian parachutists, and that was due to them, the parachutists, that they had food and weapons. They built a dugout for 40 people, as well as a bakery and a Russian bathhouse. And Grandpa bragged about this. I have a recording of him talking about how wonderful the bathhouse was. They offered Grandpa the command, but he refused because the group were young, a bunch of young men. So Grandpa was probably in his 40s at this time, and he was considered, they called him the old guy. And he thought that they wouldn't follow him. So he did not lead them. So from there was some divisions in the Yusik group. This is described in Farfel's book. And so at that point, Grandpa and Lachovitsky, they split off with a number of other people, and they separated from Yusik's group. And so they were in the forest. They had, dug another shelter, and they were there. So yeah, thank you. So while they're in the woods here, and this is the same map, so you can see the arrow pointing to the blue arrow pointing to the river, and up there is Berezhno. So Grandpa says in his story that a couple had come from the town of Berezhno. A Jewish couple had been led there by someone. They paid them to get there, and they said that they had food stored back in Berezhno, and they wanted to go back and get it, but they needed help. And they wanted Grandpa to come with them. And my grandmother was crying, and she said, "Please, please don't take him," because, a woman with children alone in the forest didn't often survive. And so, but Gabriel, who is now 16 years old, he said he was hungry, and he went with them. And on the way back, he didn't come back. So he volunteered to go. And the next day, only the wife returned, reporting that Russian partisans had robbed them of their gold and killed her husband and Gabriel. And this took place on January 11th, 1943. You're going to say something?
1942.
1943.
Oh, it was 43. Okay.
Yeah, it was the beginning of, yeah. So they lost him. They kept it from my father. He did not know until just a couple years ago that they knew that he had been killed for sure. Because, and this was a great strength of my grandparents. Our father, he was young, he was a child, so he partly was not fully aware of what was going on, but they kept it from him, and they shielded him from some of these hardships as much as they could. The same day the Russian partisans had attacked the group, they accused them of hiding gold, and they were harassing them, but then they left. They saw that they had nothing, but and that was the same day that they heard that their son had been killed, and they had to move deeper into the forest. You can stay there. And so they moved deeper into the forest. They dug another dugout. They actually were threatened by a group of Jews from the ghetto. I'm thinking it was from the Minsk ghetto, I'm not sure, and they had to give up their bunker. So they moved to build another bunker and they joined with another group. Anyway, eventually there was a scout that came from Zorin's group, and they found that Grandpa could build bunkers. And so they came from Zorin's group, the 106, and they took the family with them to Zorin's group, and that's where they stayed for the next year. And so they were in the Nalibaki with Shalom Zorin in the detachment there. And I have, there's in these written materials, the information about the different dugouts and shelters and buildings and bakeries and schools and things that he built with them. And he also did participate in some, shooting, sabotage protection details as well. But he was older, so they didn't really expect that much of him. There's lots and lots of stories that they told about what life was like in this forest. Grandpa said it was the pushcha, it was the nothingness. Dad said that the word pushcha means jungle. It was full of swamps. It was a terribly difficult place, and they could hide there. The Germans were afraid to go in. Stories of them being so hungry that the Germans had left behind an old skinny horse, and they wanted to eat the horse. They had no weapon at that point to kill the horse.
And they couldn't make a noise either. They didn't want to shoot it.
Yeah, and so they sent my father away, and they clubbed the poor creature to death, and he came back and there was dinner. Different stories like this of the time. And they also had scurvy. My father had sores on him. And he remembers that my grandmother comforting him because he was, in pain from the sores. Like
yeah.
that.
And our father, he does, he says a lot of it was because of his parent, because she and Toby sheltered him. He was allowed to play in the forest, and he even tells me things about how he found him and a couple of friends were playing in old World War I trenches that had been long overgrown. And just remembering the cold, he just remembers how cold it was, especially obviously during the winters. And in the summers, the mosquitoes and the bugs and things like that. And because they had to run, and there was a time where they were attacked by a German outfit where they had to run, and they remember running through these swamps and trying to get in as far as they possibly could. If you've seen the movie with the Bilski brothers, it's so similar, very close to them, to that group as well. And so it's a very similar condition that they were living in.
As a matter of fact, there was a story about how as they were running, there was a group of Jews who were caught by the Germans, and they were in the swamp and they were sinking down into the mud, and they just listened to them as they drowned in the mud. They just sunk down in there, and they couldn't help them. It was a terrible thing to witness. And so they stayed with the 106 detachment until the end. My father remembered the day when the soldiers came, you can go to the next one. Yeah. When the Russian army, the Soviets were pushing back the German soldiers, and they were coming running through, and Shalom Zorin called, he got together a group of them to attack them as they came by to protect themselves. But also there was a certain amount of revenge probably wanting to happen. So they stood up and they started shooting these Germans as they were running by. And that was the day. There's a picture there on the right of Shalom Zorin. He was shot in the leg that day. And he was eventually taken to the Russian medical camp in order to get his wounds cared for, and he lived. The photograph in the middle is taken from the 1960s. That is a memorial in the Nalibaki forest, and those must be survivors or descendants of survivors from the 106 detachment. This book here, we stood shoulder to shoulder. I'm sure that you will recognize this. Tamara Versheskaya, she had something to do with this, and I had this book for a few years even before I met her, because there was a listing in Jewish Gen that was translated from this book that listed in the census our family. And so we were able to find it. And so there was good information in there. And so the Nalibaki was was liberated in early July 1944. And so then it was over for them, even though the war was not over. My father did once tell a story that he experienced, that after the Germans went running by, that he saw the mutilated remains of the German soldiers, just, dismembered arms and legs and things, because, these Jews whose whole entire families and communities had been destroyed, they took their revenge.
Partisans as well.
And partisans as well. Oh yeah, Gabriel, it turns out our Uncle Gabriel was killed by Russian partisans, and that in the woods it wasn't so easy because everybody hated everybody. Everybody was, anti-Semitic against the Jewish partisans, but the Russian partisans hated the Polish partisans and vice versa, and they were all competing for scarce resources like food and weapons. So it was very difficult to live there. And so, but anyway, when it was over, they actually went back to Nesvizh, and our grandfather found an empty store because after the Germans left, there were a lot of empty places, and they took up residence there. He went back to producing the molasses again.
This time for the Russians.
Yeah, this time for the Russians instead of the Nazis. And they took notice of him, and he was friendly with them, and he was, painting walls and murals, and they asked him to speak, and he told this story that his Russian wasn't very good, but they wanted him to speak about, the wonderfulness of the Soviets, and he got up and he spoke half in Polish and half in Russian, and they were laughing, and he was laughing, and they were all drinking, and but anyway, he was afraid because the Soviets had sent their people to learn how to make the molasses from the potato starch, and he knew that once they learned how to do that, that they might send him and his family to Siberia, to the gulags. So they picked up and they left. And in 1945, when the war ended, they went back to Lodz. They found family, and from there, you probably don't need to know the rest of this, but they went to a DP camp in Austria, and then from there, they came here to this country. And then I guess we can go to the last.
Yeah, and just as a note to be, the one thing that's extremely impactful is how they were caught up in two waves of, the largest war we've ever experienced, and to see the Russians come back and the Germans. There is a story about. I'll tell again. It's just the horrors of the forest. My dad was so tired right after the liberation, and he sat down on what he thought was a log or something, and my grandmother came over and told him to get up because it was a half-buried German soldier in the forest. And so it was a terrible, terrible time to be alive, but they persevered. I don't know how, but they did. So just as a little quick closing on the family. Obviously, with Gabriel gone, this is a photograph in the top middle, right after the war, with just the three of them. Our father on the middle, with his parents, and then as life has to go on, the earth keeps spinning. As Jews say, you're not supposed to mourn for people for so long, because you have to live life. And so they came to the United States. Luckily, they had some well-off family connections that could then help them get back to the U.S. Bernice even found the ship logs of them, the Marlin,
The Marine Marlin.
the Marine Marlin
From
transport
Bremen.
from Bremen to the United States. But this shows on the bottom left, this is Toby in Israel. And I think that's in Haifa
With her sister.
with their sister. The one on the bottom in the middle is their first grandchild. That was my sister Linda, or is my sister Linda. And it was hard to find a photograph of just the three of my dad and my grandparent, our grandparents. My grandmother would not be too happy with this photo because it was Bernice, you took that picture,
Having
right?
kids.
Half eating. But you can see the admiration. My grandfather loved her so much. And you can see him staring at her. And that is Abe on the left. But it didn't stop there, just living. Shia, turns out he was an amazing artist. And so these are memorials This is the Flame of Souls on the right, which is now it was um, um, uh, on display in the Partisan Museum,
The Ghetto
the
Fighters.
Ghetto Fighters Museum in Israel. And this is two Warsaw fighters that he made a statue of, dedicating to that. He's done a number of different photos. Wasn't appropriate for this talk, but he did even has a modern Jewish soldier. It's a soldier giving a kiss and a hug to his wife or girlfriend before he goes off to war. So they remained staunch Zionists, Israel, in support of Israel to this day. As you said in the beginning, they, with everything that happened, there was not a lot of harboring of resentment. They just were just happy to be alive, and they recognized that they were the lucky ones to get out. If you think about it, of the 4,500 Jews in Nesvizh, like 20, what did they say, 25 got out of the ghetto? Was it something?
30 total, 30 survived, something
That
like
is
that.
literally not even a 0.5% of the people that were there that got out. So the odds that we're sitting here talking to you are pretty incredible. So sorry, I get a little choked up, but with that, if you have any questions, I guess we can go to that.
So,
But that gives you a sense of some individuals in the revolt.
we will go to questions, but just first of all, how amazing! I just want to thank you for that very moving presentation and your personal story and sharing it with us. And just before we go to questions, I just put this together while you were talking. It wasn't in my original slides, but I put this in because you showed this picture, which I've showed in talks, previous talks. And the reason I show it is because I've been there. And this is a picture of me here with some of my youth workers and some of my volunteers. And Tamara helped us to get there. She actually said it's an impossible place to reach. And I said, we're going. And we went. And it was the height of summer. And you talked about the freezing cold in the winter and the bugs in the summer. We were out of the car for about 5 minutes to literally say a prayer and just to sort of take in the moment. We got bitten to shreds, and as you can see, we were covered up. So it was unbelievable. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. So, we existed in it for 10 minutes, max, and I can't imagine what it must have been like to live in it. So, let's get some questions. Do people have some questions for Leon, for Bernice, for Jeff, for Tamara? Please do ask some questions. I'm sure you've got some. Don't be shy. Please unmute.
This is Miriam. I'm sitting here with my mom, B. And I know Bernice, this is amazing. So thank you for everything. I couldn't help but hear about Hashomer Hatzair. My parents, my mom's in her 90s. My dad passed away recently. They knew each other from Hashomer Hatzair here, and I would just wanted to know a little more about that.
I don't know a whole lot about it. I know it was a youth movement, a Zionist youth movement that existed from before World War II, probably, from not long after the Zionist movement began. But it was a way to get the youth interested and active and towards the whole Zionist movement. If anybody else knows anything more about it,
Yeah.
maybe.
May I add a little bit to your correct answer, basically? Shomer Hatzair was a socialist Zionist youth movement. Actually, in some point, it took even Marxist path. But during those days, it was, let's call it, very socialist Zionist youth movement. It was very popular in Poland and as well as in Lithuania in the period prior to the World War II. During the interwar period, a lot of Jewish Jews attended its activities. A lot of Jewish Jews made Aliyah through the movement to Israel, or then back then mandatory Palestine. In mandatory Palestine, this youth movement organized a large kibbutz organization called the Kibbutz Artzi HaShomer HaTzair, and actually it's still active till our days. The youth movement HaShomer HaTzair still active in Israel and abroad.
The fighting aspect, I never knew as much. Some of them were fighting
Well,
during
they were in the ghetto, they were, because they had this Zionist bent from before, they became the major part of the resistance in the Nesvizh Ghetto. I don't think that was necessarily part of what they did in general, but this was a situation that they found themselves in this particular circumstance.
Actually, in a lot of places, and not only in Nesvizh, members of Hashomer Hatzair took very active part in Jewish resistance. For example, a very well-known Mordechai Nilevich in Warsaw Ghetto uprising was member of Hashomer Hatzair. Very well-known Abba Kovner was the leader of FPO, the Vereinigte Partisanische Organization in Wilno Ghetto, was member of Hashomer Hatzair. So they're very active in actually in active resistance to the Nazis in different ghettos.
Thank you.
Thank you for those questions and for the answers. Has anybody else got any questions they would like to ask?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Ken Domashek. Thank you to the Gauls. I'm speechless. I had not heard the story. I'm familiar with the Lakovitsky memoirs. I'm familiar with the domestic memoirs. They were all in the same bunker with the Goldbergs, your ancestors. Has your ancestors' memoir been put to writing anywhere, or is this the first time we're hearing this?
We just recently got it translated. One of them is in Yiddish from a 1948 version of the Kalischer. It was a journal that was put out once a year for maybe 20 years for the remnant of Kalisz, Poland. So it was published there in Yiddish. We just got it. We just put it through an AI to translate it. It did a pretty darn good job. And this other one was from the Yisker book of Kalisz. It was in Hebrew. And sent to
Wow.
us by our cousin in Israel. And I could, if you want, I can send you both the translation and the original articles.
I very much would like to see that, and I'll be happy to share with you everything I can to help contribute and fill out the rest of the story.
Yeah.
I know Lakovitsky, descendant in Israel. I talk with her periodically. And
I'd love to be in contact too. Yeah, that'd be great.
yeah. So I would love to see what you have, and then I'm just going to hole up in a room, get all the memoirs out, and try to piece together the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'll get you my email address. In fact, I think I have that
Okay,
from
good.
earlier correspondence. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I did notice that not in my grandfather's writings, but in some of the other writings, especially Moshe Lachovitsky's, because his is very detailed, that your ancestor was there with my grandmother with music at the beginning when she was separated from my grandfather. That name was there as well. So
Yes. I posted this earlier while Leon was giving his talk. They were all in the bunker. One woman couldn't breathe, so she left the bunker early, and nothing
yes.
has been heard from her since. So we don't know what happened to her. Everybody else got out, but they got out at different times. And Kissen, Moshe Domesik, and what's his name, Sokolsky?
Lipschitz.
No, a different person. They had pliers, and they used the pliers to snip the wire so that they could escape. And that's on page 130 of the Yizkor book, and that's Shulamit Domesik's memoir, and you can read it.
Okay, yeah.
So that's there, but it's a very short memoir. The one that's long and full of detail is the Lakovitsky memoir.
Yes.
That's the one that has a tremendous amount of information. There's a summary of it in the Yizkor book, and I made mention of this in comments to the group. A letter that he wrote from Palestine to the Yiddish periodical Vorwärts has been found by one of my cousins who happens to also be a Nesvizh descendant, who happens to write. He's an author for the Forward, which used to be Vorwärts. And he went through the archives about 3 months ago and he found a 25-page letter by Lakovitsky. And he also found where part of it was published by Vorwärts in the same time frame. I can only imagine that that's an eyewitness testimony. So that letter needs to get translated, but it's in cursive Yiddish. I can't handle that.
Okay, yeah. The thing is that a lot of this story we pieced together from these other stories because, I interviewed my grandfather and he was like 92 years old and I was ignorant of the story. So I didn't ask the right questions. I didn't get all the answers in his memory. I mean, this was 1991 at this point, and he, so it was so many years, he couldn't remember everything. And my father was so young that if I were to ask him, why did you go to Nesvizh? He said, I don't know. And as a matter of fact, our father felt that he wasn't he almost was unqualified to tell the story because he was so young and he did not know the motivations. He didn't know the reasons. He had been sheltered from so many things. So the David Farfel's book and Shalom Chalafsky's book and, the book from the Museum of Jewish Resistance in Belarus and Lachovitsky and all of these, even reading about, Zorin and Yuzik and all that's what helped us put this whole story together. So
it's a great story, and don't beat yourself up for not knowing what questions to ask. None of us knew all the right questions at the time.
Right.
You have plenty of company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've done an extraordinary job, I have to say, like a puzzle. I mean, really extraordinary. Incredible. Well done. Does anybody else want to ask a question?
I want to make a comment if I can, please. So I am Nama Falfel, granddaughter of David and Elke Falfel, who were survivors of the ghetto Nesvizh, born originally in Nesvizh. They survived with my great-grandfather Gershon Falfel as well. So I heard the stories, of course, growing up. And I know the name Goldberg from the stories and from my grandfather's book. So thank you for sharing. And for me, it was very emotional. And very interesting. So just thank you for sharing.
Thank you. And thank you to your grandfather for his writing. It's very important.
Yeah, I think it shows why these sorts of events are really important to bring everybody together, to sort of bring this community together. I know that from previous talks, we've really, there have been some really interesting conversations that have come out of it. So, and I hope we'll continue to. I know that we are running out of time, so I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm just going to bring this to a conclusion, if I may, as to why we're here. I'm going to just hop back to that last image that I showed that I put in last minute, and I've just added something else in last minute because while you were speaking, Tamara sent me this image. So there's a piece of work going on actually at that site. They're doing some construction work there. So there you go, hot off press. This is what we do. So I thought you might like to see that. So the whole raison d'etre behind these talks that we've been doing is because we are running a campaign to install 2 new memorials for Nesvizh. Some of you who were at the previous talks will have heard me say this, but it's really important that I say it again. So one of those memorials is going to be at the site that was or is still the Jewish cemetery. There is no marker there, and there will be a small modest marker put here to say that this is the cemetery, and we're looking to hopefully be able to, if we raise enough, to put a little fence around the gravestones that are lying on the grass there. It's a public park today. And we're going to be replacing this memorial, which has a mistake in it, and we are going to be installing this. This is a mock-up of what we're trying to create. It will be all in, if we raise enough money, it will be a carved piece of granite. It will all be one piece, a chai on a book of life. There will be a QR code that we will be able to read more information about it. And this is a very unusual memorial in Belarus. It will be completely unique because it is a Jewish letter. And rather than it be a memorial to, as we saw in Leon's presentation, there are many memorials to the massacres. This will be a commemoration of the life, what the Jews contributed to the town of Nesvizh. And obviously we will talk about what happened to and the destruction of the community, but the focus will be on life. And I think that's really, really important, and it's very, very unusual. It's completely unique in Belarus. Excuse me. So I just want to give you some confidence in the work that we do in Belarus. This is a recently completed campaign. This is the Brest Jewish Cemetery. We raised funds and built a very, very significant memorial. It's absolutely enormous, as you can see here. There's been no marker there until now, and now over 1,250 salvaged remnant gravestones have been returned to the cemetery and now are part of this very stunning memorial. And just to let you know that there is a documentary that has been made by Jewish Life Television. So those of you in America may know Jewish Life Television. It's going to be screened on February the 20th. We're going to be sending out information about how you see that. And for those of you who are in the UK, we'll be screening it in North London on the 25th of March. And then there will be 2 screenings online, and that's already on our website. So you can find out how to watch that on the website. So that's very exciting. We also run an archive search service, so anybody looking for their ancestral records in the Belarus archives, we can help with that. And we can produce something like this, where we do find records, which is an ancestral pathway to add to your family tree. And so the Nesvizh Memorials Project can be found on our website. There were 2 previous talks, so if you missed them, you just need to contact us. We're very happy to send you the recordings. And this was the 3rd in the series. We will be sending you out the recording this week we'll send you various other links that have been talked about during this talk. And we will also be following up shortly with what happens next in the campaign, how much we've raised so far, how much we are about to still raise. We will be inviting people to make a contribution if they would like to, and then we will do an assessment of where we're at. So it's very exciting, and we are really, really looking forward to completing this campaign. So without further ado, that is the end of our talk. I would really, really like to thank our speakers, Leon, Bernice and Jeff, Tamara for the introduction, and for you for being here, because without you, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. I'm super grateful, and thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you for this absolutely fantastic presentation, Bernice and Jeff. Really moved. And I know that there are many more details which you can add to the Nesvizh story. Let's think how we can move it forward, how we can do something about this story so that it remains, because there are many scattered details. I know Ken Domeshek picks up details from different sources. He has been doing it for many, many years. And your input, I believe, will help to complete it. So let's think how to do it together.
Absolutely.
Leon, thank you for your presentation and for your participation. I hope will continue, because your knowledge about resistance in Belarus is very much needed and important for us to move forward with our museum, Belarusian Museum of Resistance in Belarus, Jewish resistance. Thank you.
Yes, and if you don't already subscribe to our newsletter, please do. You can do it on the website, or you can just email us, and we'll happily add you to the mailing list, because then you can be kept up to date of all the exciting things that are happening. And this year is going to be a very exciting year. And do try and watch the JLTV documentary. We're quite excited about that. So we'll be sending you out information about that. I'll try and send that with the follow-up to this email, so that you'll be able to watch that as well. So really, thank you very, very much indeed for all your support. Let's see if we can bring this campaign to where we need to take it, because that really is going to put Jewish Nesvizh on the map in a big way.
And Nama will be our contact in Israel, I believe.
Fantastic. Yeah, great. We'll be in touch, Nama. Thank you. So thank you. Good night or good morning, or wherever you are. I'm going to close us down now, and take care, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much.